Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today we're going to be taking a look at the second edition of the Star Tarot by Kathy McLellan. So this is a relatively new deck that has just been re-released by Schiffer, and they have re-released this deck to be borderless and some new cardstock. I do have my first edition here, which I have completely trimmed down, so we will take a look at it in comparison. Mostly just looking in terms of cardstock because, like I said, I've trimmed mine down. But before we get into that, let's take a quick look at the second edition here. It comes in this great big box. I cannot remember how big the box was in my first edition because I don't keep these big boxes like this. However, this is a really nice one, I gotta say. It has the magnetic closure on it. And it's a lovely sturdy box, and I'm sure it looks beautiful on the shelf. I just don't have shelf space for that, so I don't hang on to them. It does come with the full-size guidebook here, which is my favorite. I love decks that come with gigantic guidebooks. I'm curious to see if there's any changes between this one and the first edition guidebook. I adore the first edition guidebook. I've read it more than once. I think that there is some wonderful information in this guidebook, so I'm curious to see if it's the same. This is, I guess, going to kind of be a little bit of an unboxing because I have yet to actually open it and look through this. The cards come in this big thing here, and that's going to go by the wayside. And then here we have the deck, which is still in its little plastic wrap here. You can see it is gold gilded and it is borderless with the titles at the bottom. So let's go ahead and jump into the cards first, and then we'll come back to the book. So just starting off, let's take a look at the back of the deck, which I think is actually quite beautiful. I have, of course, trimmed my first edition. So this is my first edition one with that. Had those big blue borders. I believe I do have some videos on this deck in its original form on my channel. I will find those and link them below. And it just had the 1-star emblem in the center. This, I think, is beautiful. I love the new backs. I think they are quite wonderful. You can see here that there's quite a big size difference between my little deck that I've trimmed now and this one. I do quite like my little pocket size deck, so we'll see. But I did want to go ahead and take a look at this one. I did get this for my birthday, along with the Mary L. second edition, so we'll be taking a look at that one at some point too. It is gold gilded, which is not my favorite, and you can see there are chunks in the gilding already, and as you saw, I just now opened this deck, so I can tell you right now by holding it, it's that sharp gold gilding, and that for me, that means it's gonna go. So there'll probably be a trim of this deck in the future. The cardstock is a lovely matte. I do have to say I quite like the cardstock. Yeah, I really do like it. It's nice and flexible. It usually shuffles pretty well. We'll take a look at how it shuffles when we are to that point. Let's go ahead and take a flip through the deck. I have not put my original deck in order, so I'm not going to do like a full-on card-by-card comparison. I thought we'd just flip through the deck together. I'll note if I see any major changes. The artwork, as you can see, is quite a bit bigger, which is actually kind of nice in a deck this size. So I'm kind of interested to check out and see the details more, because in the guidebook for this particular deck, particularly in the first one, I haven't looked at the second edition guidebook yet, but there are notations of all kinds of associations in this book, in this deck. And Kathy McLellan mentions reasons of why things are there and what they mean, and the symbolic energy and influence behind them. And I think that's really fantastic. But one of the things with the first edition was that the artwork, is because you can see I've trimmed this, so this is just down to the artwork, was quite small and you couldn't really make out the details. Let's just see real quick, even though I said I wasn't going to do card by card comparison, let me just find the High Priestess in my first edition, and you can see there's quite the size difference. She's quite a bit bigger in this. I can see more of the detail, which I quite like. It doesn't look like the imagery's been changed at all. It's just bigger, and I quite like that. Although I do have to say I'm quite attached to my little pocket one. I've used it a lot, so we'll have to see how I feel about switching to a different version. Here's the Empress. I will say that the Emperor is misspelled. Schiffer is aware of that and they are working on fixing it. They are going to let me know when that is fixed. And here we go with the gold gilding. And it's sticking together. Gonna have to try to chunk it apart as we go. So they are gonna fix that, but I can tell you just in handling this deck so far that this gilding it's going. There's the Hierophant. I love the Hierophant in this deck. I think that the colors still came out quite beautiful. I think the cards are still very vibrant. For me, it's a little bit different because I'm so used to seeing this super shiny cardstock, right? And mine, I will have to say, because I have used the heck out of this deck, it doesn't really stick together anymore. It's kind of got it's like a really worn, glossy feel now. So tactilely, I kind of like the feel of this just because I've handled it so much. It's so well worn and just, I don't know, it just feels nice. But here's again, just because I happened across the Strength card. You can see that there isn't a ton of change in the color tone. So I think that's really great. A lot of times when we get a reprint, the color is different. And I love that it's really not in here. And look we can see all the symbols in the trees now, like really clearly. I think that's gorgeous. So that kind of stuff kind of excites me about this new edition. I'm curious to see when we get through. I'm just going to do a quick flip through of it and then give it a shuffle. I'm curious to see how it shuffles. Love this Justice card too. I really quite like the Hanged one in this deck. Again, these cards are sticking together. We have Death. I do also quite like Death in this deck. I think it's really beautiful. Very indicative of that Phoenix rebirth energy. We have Temperance, the Devil, and the Tower. So far, I'm not seeing any changes in the imagery. Like I said, I've used the Star Tarot quite a bit. Beautiful star. Love that one too. And the Moon. The Sun. I quite like the Sun card in this deck too. It's very beautiful. Even though we do have that throwback to the little baby, right? It's here. Always freaking reminds me of the Teletubbies. Like my kids grew up watching Teletubbies with the baby and the sun, and every time I see that, that's the first thing that pops into my mind. Not necessarily a bad association because that's when my kids were little and cute and fun, and I really enjoyed that time of life, but just kind of funny. That always makes me think of that. So here we have the Judgment card and the World. So moving into our minors, we have the Ace of Wands. Do the 2, the 3. I really don't think there's been any changes. Love this 4 of Wands. I don't think there's been any changes in the artwork. It all looks quite similar to me as it did before. But I thought for those of you who haven't seen this deck, we just did a quick walkthrough. Like I said, I do have a full review, I believe, of the Star Tarot on my channel. That's the reason I'm not going to do one here because I've already done it and nothing besides the actual cards themselves have changed. The artwork seems to have remained the same. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel where that's concerned. I know some people have had concerns with this cardstock. So I'm really curious to see the 2 of Cups, the 3 of Cups. Love this 4 of Cups too. It's one of my favorites in the deck. Of course, because it's gilded and this is the first time I'm flipping through it, the cards are sticking together. Generally that, releases. So here's the 7, which is really stuck to the 8. I'm also getting, I don't know if you can see it, but the corners of all of these, of every card is like bent. But the gilding has come over where that's where it's stuck. But like I said, probably taking the gilding off this. The 10 of Cups, the Princess, because although I'm really attached to my little trimmed version, I mean, I will totally keep that too. I am quite liking that these images are bigger. And I know this deck so well that I could totally, again, take it down to its artwork and I would still be able to read with it. But to be perfectly honest, because I already have one down to its artwork, I probably wouldn't do that. I think this is just going to be an issue of just taking the gilding off. And because I quite like the backs, and I really don't want to mess up the backs either because they're beautiful. 4 of Pentacles and the 5. So as you can probably tell, this is more of a video about the cardstock comparison than it is the actual card comparison. Because like I said, I have a full review of this deck, which I will leave linked in the description box below. It's the Princess. I haven't noticed any other typos, just that the Emperor, which again, as I said, they are aware of and they're working to fix. Love the Queen of Pentacles in this deck. King. Ace. Love the 2 as well with the reflection there. I think that's quite beautiful. And the 3 of Swords. Definitely a heartbreak energy in this one, but you know. Love this 4 of Swords too with these in the hibernation, the cave with the bear. And the 5. Love the 6 because it's got orcas. It's got orcas. Anytime I see a deck with orcas. This 7 of Swords is, I think, one of my favorites. Like one of my favorite all-time depiction of the 7 of Swords. I love it. I think it's a gorgeous depiction. I love that it has the 3 swords above and the 4 swords beneath the water. I just think that's just such a beautiful imagery for the 7. And the 9 of Swords. And the 10. This is one of those cards where the perspective on the body is a little bit odd, but Prince of Swords. The Knight. Can definitely see the details better in this one, and I do quite like that. The corners up here, that's a little bit bummer, kind of a bummer, but again, like I said, I think I'm gonna have to take the gilding off. So yeah, all the artwork seems to be the same now that I've released it all. Let's go ahead, and I think it is. Trying to think of a deck. What I have here, I have the Dame Darcy's Mermaid Tarot, which maybe not a great comparison because not everybody has this deck, but it is what I have at hand. So just going to do a quick size comparison. You can see that it's quite a bit taller and wider than the Dame Darcy. Trying to find a deck that I haven't modified is actually getting to be a challenge. So here's the size comparison to the Wild Unknown, which a lot of people have this one. So you can see here it's quite a bit wider and quite a bit taller. So it's a fairly decent sized deck in terms of size. Let's go ahead and, I can already tell that's a stretch. Give it a shuffle. I don't think I can get my hands around it. Yeah. Kind of, yeah. It's difficult for me to shuffle because it's large. Let's try a side shuffle. And it's new, so that's not really working either, but they slide really nice though. And I think that maybe once I take the gilding off, I wish deck creators would just stop with the gilding. I know I'm probably like the only one. But now I have to take it off, especially since it's all chunked up on the corners anyway. But I can't get my hands around it, and that to me is like, ow, a bummer. But I think once I take the that sharp gold gilding off, it's actually quite a lovely cardstock. I really actually kind of like it. The front feels more textured than the back, which is interesting. But you can see here that, like, it slides beautifully. It overhands beautifully. I just not a fan of the gold gilding. Especially when they use the cheapy gold gilding. Like, there is a difference. I have decks that do still have the gold gilding on them because it's very nice gold gilding. This gilding is already chunked up in a bunch of places. It's chunked up on the corners, so I don't know if you can see there, but all of those corners all have the bend where the gilding has wrapped around the front of the card. So that in hand, this is my little trimmed one, which because I have used it so much, the glossy stickiness has worn. I shouldn't say the glossiness is worn off, because the glossiness is not worn off. The stickiness has worn off quite a bit, so it actually has a really nice feel. But if you know, this one, I can actually shuffle it. So, and because I've worked with this one so much, I'm really fond of it. It's like kind of like my Llewellyn in that way, where I have a little bit of an attachment to it. But I do really like that the artwork is a lot bigger here. And I do really like that, I do really like the cardstock. I wasn't sure if I was going to, but it's matte, it's nice and flexible and thin. I really don't like when decks are super thick. Now, interestingly enough here, you know, I say this is that it's the cardstock, the thickness, I don't think is any different. I think it's just the coating or the lamination or the coating that's on the deck that's different. Because if you look here, I'm not entirely sure how to do this, but this deck is actually bigger. It's actually thicker. So can I do this way? So still the same 78 cards, but this deck is actually thicker. So that means that the cardstock itself on this deck, which is funny because it doesn't feel like it, the cardstock is actually thicker on this deck than it is on the first edition, but it doesn't feel like it, which I think is where that matte comes in. It's like deceptive. It makes it feel thinner than it actually is. And I think that's also the case with some of the Llewellyn decks, is that that matte makes it feel like it's thinner, but this cardstock is actually thicker. Because if I line these up, these two decks line up right here. Now they're the same height. Oop, one more card. Now they're the same height. And so you can see here, I still have half a dozen cards here. So the cardstock is actually thicker on this one, which I thought was quite interesting. So, I know we talk a lot about cardstock when we talk about decks. And I think that cardstock is important, at least for me, because working with a deck is a tactile experience, right? We hold it, we shuffle it, we sort through the cards, we look at the cards. I can tell you right now, I'm feeling this gilding digging into my fingers and I'm not loving it. But it is a tactile experience to work with a deck, because you have to be able to shuffle it, work with it, lay out cards, hold it in your hands, feel the energy of it. This one, of course, feels much better in my hand. For one, it's smaller. And two, I've worn this deck used it so much that it is quite worn now. So I think cardstock is an important conversation to have, because I think, at least for me, personally, it does affect my ability to use a deck. A deck that has really bad cardstock, I just won't end up using it, and then I end up trading it, or, you know, I do mod my decks, but you can't really mod bad cardstock. You can mod things like taking off gilding, taking off excess border, things of that nature, but I can't literally fix the paper and the cardstock that these decks are printed on. So I think it is important, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go ahead and do this comparison. Also because the Star Tarot is one of my favorite decks and I use it quite often, so I was excited to get the second edition for my birthday and to really check it out and to check out this cardstock, because I think that once I take the gilding off, I think I am actually going to like it. And I do like that the images are bigger. I feel like there's no real change in the color tone, just the it looks, you know, it's just the finish on it that's different. So you can see the imagery got bigger by, you know, roughly a half inch or so. So I think this deck was pretty close to this size originally. It just had great big blue borders all the way around it, which I of course took those off. So that's a look at the cardstock for the second edition. So let's take a quick peek through the book. I think that it's all full color now, which is kind of cool. But just at first glance, it doesn't look like the book has changed any. Just looks like the layout of it has changed. And the printing, let's go ahead and pull the first one. So here's the first edition book. You can see like mine is well worn. It looks like this one is maybe a little bit thicker, but I don't know that that's because there's any more information. I think it's just different paper. So you can see here that the layout is exactly the same. This is just in full color. So so here's where we have the main minor arcana. And here's where we have the minor arcana. So just, you know, some design changes. It doesn't look like the text has changed any. So it looks like the book's probably about the same. This book, you guys, though, so full of fantastic information. I love this book. I read it, like I said, more than once. As you can see here, like anything that is in bold relates directly to the imagery that's in the card, which I think is lovely. I love when deck creators do that. Yeah, beautiful book. I think that the second edition book has the same information, I think, probably as the first, although I have not read it, so I haven't done an exact comparison, but it looks at first glance like it's the same. It's just, you know, produced a little bit nicer. It's a little bit, obviously the image is different on the front because they've gone with the hermit card for the front, which I think is lovely. And I think that it's a beautifully produced book. I like that it's full color because you can go through and you can read, especially a book like this where there's a ton of information. You can take this book and you can just go and read it and study it, and you don't necessarily have to have the deck with you. So I think that's really lovely. So just in kind of wrap up here, the book appears to be about the same. So the artwork in the deck appears to pretty much be the same. The backs, of course, have changed, which I do actually really like the new backs. So that's kind of lovely surprise. That is gold gilded, which is I'm not a fan of that, but that's me personally. I do quite like the cardstock. I think that once I take the gold gilding off of it, that I'm gonna like it even better, because that's really my only hiccup that I'm having with this deck just here, and holding it in my hands is really just that gilding, which I'm just personally not a fan of. I think it makes the deck feel harsh and like sharp, like it has sharp edges. I don't know. It just makes the deck feel unwelcoming to me when you have gold gilding like this that's sharp. And of course, like I said, my corners are dinged up anyway, so I guess we'll be doing a mod with me on that, because that's going to be happening. I'll just have to decide whether or not I want to keep the titles on here or take it down to just the artwork, which of course is beautiful in this deck. But I think because I already have one, and I do quite love this one, it's one of my favorites. This will be like my pocket size one, and I think I'll just have this one as my larger edition once I take the gold gilding off. Hopefully it'll work for me a little bit better. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for the decks featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.